Good afternoon, everybody, and a big welcome to the final session of the Irish Council for Social Housing's 2020 conference. So you're all very welcome. We've got almost 100 people in the room already. So this afternoon's session is going to be a stimulating and informative afternoon with a range of speakers. And the topic is building the landscape for sustainable housing, financing and policy. So just to introduce myself, I'm going to be chairing this session, and my name is Paula Butler, and I have over 25 years experience in environmental consulting. A lot of you might know me from my 10 years with SCAI, and I worked there mainly on the building energy rating scheme and then on the grants, so I know a lot of the housing associations have benefited from those schemes. So I now have my own business, and my focus is a bit broader on kind of stimulating behavioural change in terms of empowering people to make changes so that we can address climate change and improve ourselves there. And it's an empowering approach rather than a guilt or fear-based approach. But obviously housing takes a big part to play in that, and that's going to be the focus for this afternoon's session. We have a really nice mix of panelists. So we're going to have the Lord Mayor of Dublin providing a political view. We have a financial view from Kevin McGillycuddy from the European Investment Bank. We have a technical view from Andree Dargan of the County Architect in Rathdown. And then also we have a social housing view, very much on the ground view from Aidan Culhane, who is the CEO of the Iveagh Trust. So it's a nice mix of panelists, and hopefully we'll have a very engaging session. Just to give you an idea of how the afternoon will run, each speaker will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a comprehensive question and answer session once we've heard from all four speakers. You'll see that there is a Q&A button on the bottom kind of right-hand side of your screen. So when we open up the floor for questions, you can type in your questions there, and then we'll call on you to come on screen and just ask your questions. So we now will get started with our first speaker, and we're very honoured to have the Lord Mayor of Dublin with us to provide the opening speech. Councillor Hazel was elected as the 352nd Lord Mayor of Dublin in June 2020, and she is the 9th woman to hold that office. Her family are from Hong Kong, but Lord Mayor was born and raised in Dublin herself. She was the first person in her family to go to college, and she studied politics and history in UCD, and she is trained as a barrister. After that, she has an impressive track record, and she worked as a barrister in Sydney, Hong Kong, and China, and she worked for Bord Bia in New York, and she also worked with Diageo as head of brand and corporate trade communications. So a wide range of experience. The Lord Mayor first became involved in politics in 2014, and in 2019 she was elected as a Green Party councillor and topped the poll, and also became chair of the Green Party. So obviously we can see a strong environmental leaning there, which is great. The Lord Mayor also actively promotes diversity and equality, and I'm sure you're well familiar with the Lord Mayor from her media contributions. So the Lord Mayor is going to give us a political perspective on sustainable housing in Ireland. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to the Lord Mayor.
Thanks a million, Paula, and thank you for everyone for attending today, various sessions. And I have to say, it's amazing work. It's the discussions that we need to have to make sure that we have sustainable social housing in the city and in the country. And the more that we can feed off each other's ideas, the better it is, because we're on this precipice where in light of COVID and in light of all the challenges that we have, there is a real opportunity here for change, and there's a real opportunity for efficient change as well, because time and time again we've seen when it comes to social housing, when it comes to any type of build, sometimes it takes so long and many red tapes as well. When I heard the name of someone from Iveagh Trust there mentioned, it's great to hear, because I would have worked with Diageo in the background, where when I looked at that housing model back in the day of what was created, it's really what we should be aiming for. So, and it is that putting people's right to housing first more than anything else. And that's where I'd be coming from a political perspective as well, because for this program from government, we have been always, it states very clearly that there's a commitment to the referendum on housing within the program for government, and that's what we will be establishing. Because for us, especially for the Greens, and all parties, right to housing is a fundamental right. And I think for me, working with the council, one of the largest local authority here, is that we have a huge opportunity here to make sure that there is the right amount of, that there is a right strategy when it comes to social housing. So sorry, I just had a message to the headset. Oh, that's not for me, sorry. So that's for someone else, I'm guessing. I guess from my perspective, looking at my personal background of different countries I've lived in, and also the party background. So as Paula alluded to, the political side of things, but also I like to throw in the family side of things as well. Like I can't erode from the fact that diversity is within my blood and what I try to promote. And within that, I think the integration factor when it comes to social housing is really important. And I think for me, that's why having sustainable social housing is really important, because if we are to have a fit for purpose integration strategy for the various local authorities, having social housing is essential, because research has shown that migrants tend to flock towards cheaper housing, and they then tend to not integrate because they're not within their communities that can integrate. Whereas if you have what would be the Vienna model or any other model that promotes equitable and social and affordable housing, you will have communities that will be second generation or first generation migrants that will be able to integrate with their peers, with different people in their communities, making various communities within the country more diverse, but also more fair. So, and you would see that in countries that would have the, as I said, Vienna model in it, where you will have a doctor living next to a cleaner, living next to a migrant, and everyone is of the equal footing. And that's what we need to put that to within the city. So from a political perspective, I guess if we are looking at integration strategies, which is something that we are looking at because the current one is not fit for purpose, then housing is one of the first things we need to look at when building in that strategy. And this is why this conversation on sustainable social housing is really important in that regards, well, from a personal and professional point of view for me. So, and then in terms of, I guess talking to people within the industry, I know talking to someone from Culhane, the affordable housing model is essential insofar. I know we talk so much about it when it comes to cost rental, and there's rumors, not rumors, I think there's a perhaps some would favor model based on discount on market, but this does not mean cost rental, and it simply entrenches the high land values, and it goes back to valuing developers and also putting up the cost of land, which is something that we need to turn away from in the current environment and in any environment actually. I think for me it's always been that there's an opportunity here with a new government, with a pandemic that is having our backs up against the wall and making us think in different ways of how can we improve the overall way that we build. So I'm trying to think of other things that would be relevant, but ultimately, like we have a new minister in place. I think that it would be great to see what comes out from the housing department now. I think that there's a team that will be pushing towards more sustainable social housing, or at least I hope there will be. Excuse me, and I hope that the cost rental model that is valued by so many of the contributors here, as I mentioned, Culhane, would be the one that will be favoured more than anything else and rolled out. And on that note, Paula, I'm going to pass you back to any questions or your, excuse me, other panelists while I'm sleeping away. So.
Bless you. Well, thank you very much for that. And I think we're going to just leave the questions until all the speakers have spoken, because it's a bit easier just to manage on Zoom. So like that, thank you very much for that. I think that's very interesting to bring that whole kind of community aspect to this, which is the one that can sometimes be forgotten.
Paula, can I just raise one last thing? Sorry, I should have mentioned it there. The overall regional and national level when it comes to housing, like I've been harping on about local government reform, and I think that's really essential when we look at housing, because a lot of our local authorities happen to have their hands tied when it comes to housing, and how the kind of I guess the filtering of power. So one of the things I would very much emphasize is that there needs to be local government reform and direction and power given to local authorities and councillors in that regard. So thanks.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure Andree might have something to say on that when she takes the mic. But thank you very much for that, and some really interesting points. And again, that's what this afternoon is about, bringing that diversity of perspectives so that we can get a holistic view. So thank you very much for that, Lord Mayor. So we will move along now to our second speaker. So we have Kevin McGillycuddy. Kevin is a senior economist in the urban division of the Projects Directorate of the European Investment Bank. So Kevin is involved in technical, economic, environmental and financial review of investments and policy development. So again, somebody who can bring that mix of perspective from economic to environmental, financial, everything. So very good mix of perspectives. Kevin's career spans more than 2 decades in institutional fund management and private equity investments, supporting large-scale urban developments both in Ireland and across Europe. So I'm going to hand you over now to Kevin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is the point in the day where my dog usually comes in to pay a visit, so it'll keep the session rather real. So just bear with me. Let me try and share my presentation if I can. Let's see. Can everyone see that?
No.
We can't see that, Kevin, no.
Okay, can you see it? Can you see it now?
No, we can't, Kevin.
Okay.
I can share my screen. I have the presentation here.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, you do. Great. Great.
No, that's okay. That's up now.
Craig's done that. Okay.
Okay. Super. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. Just kind of a broad statement. EIB has been involved with financing social housing across Europe for many years, and has funded approximately 20 billion in investments. And the demand continues to be there. There's still a gap in funding annually of circa 6 billion euros. So EIB, while it's making great efforts in this area, there's still more to be focused on. Could we go to the next slide, please? And for those that don't know the bank well, it's the largest international development finance bank, roughly funding 63 billion euros of investments, and it's across, you know, 4 priority areas: the environment, infrastructure, innovation, and SME. And social housing is obviously one of those areas that kind of crosses over between environment and infrastructure. And importantly, the bank prides itself as a AAA rated lending institution. And could we go to the next slide, please? So to bring social housing into context, it's delivered through meeting the urban agenda, and again, it crosses into urbanization, climate change, areas of inclusion, innovation, and within these, housing financing is a key priority. Next slide, please. And again, just to contextualize, just EIB's involvement with urban lending, and this is around the entire spectrum. Over the last 5 years, we've spent roughly, or we've loaned 113 billion worth of capital, and urban lending is somewhere between a quarter and a third of EIB's total lending. Next slide, please. And maybe just to bring it into focus in Ireland, EIB has been lending here and has funded up to 18.5 billion long-term investments, and that's ranged from everything from sustainable mobility, education, SMEs, and specifically supporting housing activity in Ireland. And as many of you would know, probably one of our best programs is through an intermediated lending program with the HFA, where we're supporting over €1 billion of investments. We also have an innovative PPP structure with the NDFA, and here we're supporting another 1,500 homes in social housing. And then just to touch upon another area where we're focused, we're also looking at providing advisory services for the Department of Housing related to cost rental housing and looking at a broad framework approach to that. Next slide, please. And just very quickly, this is really how we look at the spectrum of housing. Basically, we focus on social and affordable. We don't involve ourselves in market housing for sale or for rent. So that's a differentiation of where EIB makes its involvement in this sector. Next slide, please. And so who do we lend to? Obviously, we lend to special entities, which is the HFA. We also lend to banks through other intermediated lending structures. We fund directly through the cities and, of course, housing companies. Next slide, please. And here, this is just a broad discussion about how we approach it. EIB is a policy taker. You know, our main focus is to make sure we're supporting local and national strategies. So we're looking at everything from the regulatory housing to planning. Again, it's a focus on social and affordable housing, not market housing. And we also look at targeted groups. We also fund senior housing or nursing home housing, and also student accommodation as another aspect to housing. Next slide, please. And just to highlight here, we have a number of avenues for advisory activities, and what I had mentioned previously about the cost rental affordable housing is through the EIB Advisory Hub and the Urbis program. There's a number of other programs that look at everything from broad structural strategies from regional and local levels to advising on environmental and energy efficiency aspects. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is probably just to contextualize the discussion. It was in September of last year, EIB had announced that its intentions to become the EU Climate Bank, and with the main goal of investing over €1 trillion for climate action and environmental sustainability. One thing to emphasize here is that as of at the end of this year, the bank will be fully Paris aligned in terms of its investments. And by 2025, 50% will focus specifically on climate action and environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. And I mean, just to say that the bank itself has been involved in supporting environmental and sustainability and climate action for quite some time. It's evolved to now fully align itself with the Paris alignment. And of course, it still has to meet EU policies. So there's other aspects. If you ask yourself, well, what's the if the contribution is only 50%, where's the other 50% going? And some of that's in areas like digital innovation, cybersecurity, supporting SMEs, gender-related support. So those type of areas that are not specifically categorized in climate action and environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. Just one of the hallmarks for EIB is their new energy lending policy. This focuses on obviously improving energy efficiency for the existing building stock, but also new buildings, and it's aligned with the new EU taxonomy on sustainable finance. So it's supporting a 20% improvement on NZ criteria for new buildings, and then of course at least a 20% improvement over existing energy efficiency for renovations. Next, please. And so how does this align itself? Well, EIB is focused, it's focused on the Green Deal. It's supporting all different aspects of it, everything from mobility to natural capital finance. It's looking at building renovations, and obviously building renovations and improvements is a major focus, and it's been an area that's been often neglected. So that's a strong strategy. Next slide, please. And then here are some of the linkages between the urban agenda, and again, social and affordable housing. It kind of crosses over into these areas where we're looking at circular city funding. natural capital finance for housing. There's the renovation initiative, air quality improvement, and of course focus on sustainable mobility. And then lastly, but just as important, as Europe goes through an energy transition away from fossil fuel consumption, there's a need for a just transition, both in urban and regional development. And obviously that's an area where EIB will be focused on supporting those areas. Next slide, please. And that's the end of my presentation for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Kevin. I certainly have lots of questions for you for the Q&A session, but it's brilliant to see that the bank has such a strong focus now on climate action and environmental sustainability. And certainly I would be really interested to see more about what criteria you have to meet to be eligible for that funding, and maybe some of the housing associations would be interested in that too. So we might get to that in the Q&A. So thank you very much for that, Kevin. Great to have a completely different perspective, and good to see that the money's coming. So our next speaker now is Andree Dargan. So Andree is the County Architect for Dún Laoghaire Rathdown County Council, and as you all know, they're very active and have been leaders in terms of developing more energy efficient and sustainable buildings out in Dún Laoghaire. Andree is the County Architect, and she's a member of the County Council's management team and heads up the Architects Department, which provides a broad range of building related services in the areas of housing, civic buildings, public and urban design, energy, conservation and dangerous buildings. So Andree is going to give us more of a technical perspective perhaps on sustainable housing based on her extensive experience in both the planning and delivery of social housing out in Dún Laoghaire. So I'm going to hand you over to Andree now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Are you getting that?
Yep.
We got full screen now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to focus on two particular projects, Rochestown House and Rapid Delivery Houses in George's Place in Dún Laoghaire. And I'm going to focus on these because we find these are quite challenging areas. We maybe can find it easier to build a new build, but if we're trying to build energy efficient and sustainable houses, we often find that these are the two difficult areas. So this all comes back to the fact that we try to future-proof our county, and to do that we build our new builds to passive and to NZEB standard as best we can. So this is going to be a very fast whip through two projects. I've got quite a bit of information in the slides, and you can refer to it afterwards, and I can take questions or people can get in touch with me, but I'll be going quite fast. So the first scheme is Rochestown House. It was a 3-phase project, and the phase I'm going to talk about is phase 2. We had done phase 1, an earlier upgrade, and then phase 3 is where the trees are in the centre, and we've gone in and put 14 units in since we have done phase 2. So phase 2 I'm going to talk about is that long block and sort of the top right there. The scheme was located within the former wall garden of an estate house, and it was near shops and in the Laoghaire area. They had existing small bedsips which were too small and they were difficult to heat, and people didn't really want to take up these units, tenants. We wanted to create a new community of smart and accessible buildings. And we were also thinking of long-term living, so we would have a range of unit types that would accommodate people's needs as they aged. It was a scheme for the elderly. It was also therefore part of our downsizing initiative, so we got people to come out of other family units when they came into these units. So there were a number of stakeholders involved, and we got support from a number of areas. So Rochestown House, it was a Eurofit project, which was a pilot project. So we were the Irish project as part of that. And the idea of that was that you would dramatically improve the energy performance and comfort of existing buildings in a step-by-step way. We actually did quite a bit of it at the same time. So out of that, we didn't actually get funding towards the project itself. We got training for the design team. We got training for the contractors who were going to tender for it. And then when the successful contractor came on board, we got further training for that contractor. There was supervision on site and education as well. So we did a number of study trips. And then afterwards, we had monitoring and verification and some post-project analysis. So it was supported by the Department of Housing, Community as it was then, and local government, planning, and SAI through the BEC 2014 grant. So what we had originally was 26 bed sits and 8 one-bed apartments. You can see how small the bed sits were there in the bottom left of the screen. There were 24 meters, square meters. So what we did is we put 2 bed sits together and upgraded it therefore to a 48 square meter one-bed apartment. But in order to keep the numbers, we had to add extra accommodation. So we still ended up with 34 units at the end, but we did this by means of adding 1 story on top of the building. That allowed us to actually get the extra units in. So we also added a lift, as you can see, for accessibility, and we added another stair core at the end of the building. We also added community facilities. So we added a small office, there was a nurse's station, there was a laundry and a commercial sort of kitchen off the sort of a big community room. The project cost in the order of 3.5 million, and the energy efficiency elements were approximately 890,000 of that. So this is roughly what we did just in terms of the construction of it. We had the building, we basically externally insulated the existing walls, and we then put the roof on top. So you just see some of the details coming up in relation to that. So we externally insulated the wall with 200 mil EPS, and that gave us a U value of 0.15. On the other elevation, we externally insulated with 250 EPS because that was more facing towards the northern side, and that gave us a U value of 0.12. The existing floor, we didn't do anything with because it became too much of an issue to have to deal with that. So we left that, so it still had quite a high U value. But when we did our calculations, that all worked out perfectly. Then in the new bit up on top, we added aerated block of 215, and that was externally insulated also with 200 mil, and that gave us 0.13. And then on the other face, we put 150 mil onto the new block, and that was because we wanted to put some timber paneling up the front of the building. We put a new roof on then that gave us a 0.13 detail. So the details were slightly different depending whether we were front or back facade. So the original U value had been 3.75 and we got it down to 0.12. And then on the other elevation, similarly, the back facade, we did the same. So we had existing concrete panels there. So this is just some of the details to show what we ended up with and some of the analysis we were able to do. You can see on the left some images of our building control system. So we have access to that remotely, so we can get in and have a look at the building. You can also see if the boilers are working, etc. And you can flick between different portals to get different levels of information. So it was an NFIT project, which is basically brought up to the Passive House refurbishment standard. So we upgraded the district heating from oil that was on site to a gas micro CHP, and that served this building, which is phase 2, and it also served the new buildings in phase 3, which were the 14 additional houses we added later. We got our air tightness down to below 1 air change per hour, which is actually the NFIT standard, the Passive House retrofit standard. We added heat recovery and we brought the BERs up. And what it's showing you there, just those little images, they're just showing you the way we can actually see the energy use in different apartments. You can click around an individual apartment and see when the energy is being used at different times of the day, or you can see it across the floors of the building. We also wanted to make sure that the building was user friendly. So the only controls the tenants had to use was a little panel in their apartment, which basically put the heating up or down. So after the retrofit, we ended up with a heating demand of only 25 kilowatt hours per metre squared per annum. But before the retrofit, this is what we had had. So it was a huge, huge improvement. This is just some images just to show you what the building looked like and some of the new equipment that we put in. You can see the CHP there and the gas boiler. So there were 3 gas boilers there in addition to the CHP. So almost domestic scale, but actually was serving the 34 units plus the additional 14. And the small little heat recovery ventilation system, that was the one in the heating in the communal room, but the ones in the apartments were somewhat similar, the little individual apartments. So I suppose what we learned, and there's a bit of information in this, I guess, is that it illustrates to us how existing stock can be reused, even if it is in very poor condition. It gave a greater awareness of the importance of energy to both the client and to the tenants. we discovered that obviously building to passive house, or NZEB, which would have been ahead of the standard at the time, are both high standards with an emphasis on on-site care, and quality assurance was required to ensure that we got effective on-site attention to detail. It did need a national upskilling of the design and construction sectors for either level of build, and that's probably still the case. It was a big learning experience for both the contractor and the design team. And everybody learned, including ourselves and the passive consultant, the difference between theory and practice. What you might have put in a drawing may not actually be so easy to implement on site. And we also gave quite a bit of knowledge dissemination on the project. But I suppose the things to really be aware of, that it's important that at the design stage to carry out an air leakage test, because then you at least know what you're dealing with and you learn about the fabric, the existing fabric. At tender stage, it's important to specify each transparent component, like the doors, windows, etc. And it's important what the U values are and the G values. Also that they program in preliminary air tightness tests for the building, and that the contractor makes sure he covers the price in for temporary sealing various parts of the building that he would need to do while he's doing those tests. Select a main contractor if you can that has training and experience in low energy construction, because that saves an awful lot of effort when you're on site and difficult conversations. And when you're selecting windows and doors, etc., you really need to see that the detail is actually acceptable from the manufacturer's point of view. You might want to put the door or window completely out in the external skin, but actually it may not be so easy for them to do it structurally. And on-site supervision is actually crucial to the success of it. You can just see there a couple of the little details about how we detailed the different insulations for fire, for example, and how we supported the windows hanging out off the building, and where we did air tightness, etc., and how we turned the insulation down over the footing to actually give us the right detail down at the floor level. And also we did a lot of thermal bridging analysis to see what actually each detail was actually going to be like. These are just a couple of run through of some images to what, so we actually started looking like this. This was us going through site. And this was the end product. So you can see that we added on a floor at the top, and we externally insulated, put in new windows, doors, etc. And you're looking at the lift tower there in the front. So I suppose just really this project has had quite a bit of attention, partly because of the Eurofit project. It has also been exhibited in the Iveagh in London. It's made the front cover of a book in England. It made the SCI Award finals, and it won the RAI, which is the Architects Institute Sustainability Award in 2017. It's also made it into a European book called 20 Architectural Projects Across Europe Against Climate Change, and it's been exhibited in the European Parliament building. I suppose what it shows is that while we thought everybody was doing this, obviously people weren't, and actually there was a huge lot of learning on this particular project. The little image in the bottom left shows you as it looks more or less now, with the third phase having been put into the centre area of the site, and you can actually see this block in the distance. So the whole area is developed up into a lovely little community with a little village space in the centre where the elderly can actually sit out. And the three images on the bottom right there are really just to show you that any project like this can actually take a significant time to actually deliver. So you have three different Coherlooks have worked their way through that project. So the first Coherlook was in place when the project was handed over. Then the following year we got the RAI award. It was another Coherlook, and then sometime later we got the NRFIT certification, because we had to follow through with various testing information. So the other project I'm going to briefly talk about is George's Place. So this project was a scheme designed to sort of try and deal with issues we find in Dún Laoghaire. So we had an urban framework plan, and we had a couple of issues in that. One was that we wanted to create a route from the waterfront up to the main street, and George's Place ran along that route, so that worked. And we also wanted to create active frontage along Kelly's Avenue, and we also wanted to increase the population in the town, so it served those purposes. So we added 12 two-storey bedroom houses, and you may have seen the little short video that Aidan Bly was on earlier on before this session started. So the scheme was designed to use materials that complement the character of the area. We had protected structures nearby, so we wanted to do detail it sensitively, and we wanted to explore how family housing can be provided in an urban area by maximising the use of valuable land. So the layout includes a terrace of 4 houses and a pair of semi-Ds that front onto Kelly's Avenue, they're the piece on the right, and then a further 6 houses in the little terrace internally in that little courtyard area, fronting onto a little shared space. So the process for actually delivering it was that the architects department, we designed the project up to our Part 8 process. That was in September 2016, we got the Part 8 adopted. It was then decided that it would be delivered as part of the Rapid Delivery Programme, and the government was pushing to roll out that delivery to try and speed up delivery of social housing. So we took on consultants from our consultants framework. We went to tender for that, and the roles they carried out were employers rep, PSTP assigned certifier, and then you had the engineers and the QS as well. So they prepared the tender documents for the new OGP framework that was coming. So the projects, the documents they prepared were the works requirements, the tenders and schedules, etc., and the instructions to tender. So quite a significant package of work for a design build contract. So at that point, we were ready to go out to the OGP framework, but the OGP framework hadn't actually been established, and we were anxious to go. So we actually went out to one of our own contractor frameworks. Turned out actually that nobody wanted to actually do it, because our contractor frameworks were more typically for employer-led design. So we actually got no successful tenders, even though we had gone out before Christmas. So this gives an example of a typical general arrangement drawing that we would have done. You can see it's difficult probably for you to see it, but it's quite detailed. But we were really focused on the external skin of the building, and we were leaving it up to the contractor as to how they might actually construct it and how they might deal with the internals, because we were concerned about what it looked like in the community and beside the protected structures. So we focused on the skin of the building. So then in January, the OGP framework was actually established. So we went out to the OGP framework once their standstill had happened in February 2017. In March, the tenders were returned, and then the tender period was extended for 4 to 7 weeks on request from contractors. In April, a letter of intent was issued, but then there was a delay in issuing the letter of acceptance due to some underbidder queries, and actually it took us until July before actually the letter of acceptance got issued and the contract signed. So you can see even that, even though we thought we were being quite quick, that it took quite a bit of time. I suppose phase one, the first thing that happened then over the following 3 months is the contractor then took our drawings and turned them into his own contractor proposals. And this would be a typical detail of what we would have got. Also at the same time in this stage, we had mock-ups done on site, full size. So this was really to establish that we were happy with the level of detailing and the way it would be done. And there was a little bit of over and back. And then once we all settled down as to what we wanted, it was sort of pretty much plain sailing. This just shows you how complex the site was, and you can see they were working on the main street and blocking up the street at night and everything else. So it was quite a tricky site to develop on because it was so tight. This just gives you a top left, shows you the site before we started, and then our little image, and then the final product, and you can actually see it's turned out very like what we had actually designed up. So the Part 8 was adopted in September 16, the contract was signed in July 17, and the handover was June 18. For conclusions, for design build projects, you really need to be clear about what you want, and you need to put this into your work requirements, because design build is different to the regular employer-led design. You do need to be brave and don't lower your standards, because we know that the market can deliver, but it's not going to deliver if you don't ask. So if you put out sort of high expectations, the market will be able to deliver that back. So be conscious of areas that you design that allow options, and therefore you should get more competitive tenders. In other words, don't design something maybe that's a module for something that a trust can't actually make easily. So try and design in the knowledge of what people can actually achieve. Allow the contractor to bring his expertise to the table, because there can be more than one right way to do something. And choose your criteria appropriately that you're going to actually determine the contract on. I suppose what we wanted in an overall sense, we wanted high quality materials and detailing of the external skin. We wanted high quality private open space and public realm details. We wanted an A1 BER, and we wanted to approve the compliance sample before proceeding. So we really wanted to get the standard right that we'd all agree with. So our meet criteria was a combination of quality and price. And in quality, we looked at program, we looked at the design approach of the contractor, we looked at the team they put on board, and durability, which were the materials, etc. So our aims for this project were to show how we can regenerate underutilised urban sites, to produce high quality, low energy housing, at the same time moving to a rapid delivery programme. We also wanted to disprove the idea that rapid build necessarily means lower quality, because that can be sort of thought, as it is vital that in the current drive to increase the numbers that we all know we need to do, that we don't let the quality drop. So we do need to keep the quality up, and it demonstrates what can be achieved cost effectively in a rapid delivery programme, but on a difficult site. So I suppose just the end result was that we got A1 ratings. You can see we blitzed the NZEB standard. If you'd see the EPC and CPC down at the bottom, they were down at 0.1s, and the other standards are 0.3 and 0.35. And we got it handed over to our Cahill. At the same time, the contractor was very proud of the scheme, and they put it forward for the Irish Green Building Council Awards. So it was awarded the Home Performance Index of a silver certification, which was the highest score for a multi-unit development. So the features we had on the building were brick clad, we had zinc roofing, we had triple glazed Velvac windows, we had angled windows because we had small gardens and so you didn't have direct overlook into the units behind. And we wanted low maintenance, and we had a small little home zone area and nice detailing for the public realm. And in terms of energy then, we designed the passive house design principles, although we didn't insist that they got it to that level, and we missed it really just by a little bit of air tightness, just as a little bit above the standard. We used the nylon for the space and water and the ventilation and heat recovery, and we had temperature controls. We did a lot of thermal modelling to avoid cold bridging. We used air tightness high levels, and we used PV panels. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Andree. You covered a huge amount. Well done in your few minutes. So thank you very much for that. I think we can all agree there's lots of brilliant practical advice. I mean, I think you can really see there the experience you've had both in Rochestown and George's Place. Great practical tips for others who might be keen to follow in your footsteps. So thank you very much. I took loads of notes myself, so thank you very much for that. Just to the audience, just don't forget, after our next speaker, that'll be the last speaker, so we'll have open up our Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, I know we've one in already from Clwyd, but if you do have questions that you're thinking of, you can start popping them into the Q&A so that we can, the panels can get ready to answer your questions when we're finished all with the talks. So we'll move on now to our fourth speaker. So our fourth speaker is Aidan Culhane, and this is very much on the ground experience as well from the Iveagh Trust this time. Aidan is a chartered town planner and a member of the Chartered Institute of Housing. He holds a master's degree in regional and urban planning from UCD and is an associate lecturer in the Institute of Public Administration. Aidan has also been a special advisor on housing to the department, and he also served as a councillor in Dún Laoghaire. I think we heard his mention there in the last presentation. Aidan was a director of housing with Urbio Residential, and he's currently the CEO of the Iveagh Trust, which has one of the oldest housing stocks in Ireland, and therefore Aidan, I suspect you have a big challenge on your hands. So Aidan is just going to talk to us now about sustainable housing from the Housing Association perspective. Thanks, Aidan.
Thanks, Paula. I'm going to try to share my screen here if I can. Does that work?
It does, yep.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Chair. I'm afraid if you thought I was going to be able to draw together all the threads of Andree's and Kevin's and the Lord Mayor's presentations, I have to disappoint. I suppose Kevin talked about the financial side of things, and Andree talked very much on sustainability. And so what I want to talk is, while I will talk about sustainability in an environmental sense, I really want also to focus on the financial sustainability of certain aspects of particularly an organisation like ours, which has a lot of older housing stock. We do, of course, have a lot of new stock and a lot of A-rated stock. We took in nearly 200 units last year of A-rated units, which are great, but the bulk of our stock is quite old. I've titled this "No Good Deed Goes Unpunished," and I don't really want to be seen as negative in any sense on this. I don't know how I can change these slides now. It's not changing, no?
Nope.
No. Okay, don't understand that. 1 second. One second. Now, can you see that? Okay,
yes, yes,
there. Need a sigh of relief. So, as I say, I've called it, no good deed goes unpunished, which is really just to illustrate on a very small scale. And again, the others have focused on much larger projects, Kevin talked about projects about €1 trillion project. But this is really around just dealing on at a very small level with older stock that becomes available as people move on in life, and units that may have had a very long tenure and a very long long enduring tenancies come to an end, and we're now faced with empty units. I just want to say though, in general, that in general, I think we do enjoy a benign funding regime in the AHB sector for new units. I think there's lots of opportunities for us, and we're relatively well aligned across the public and private sector around what we want to do and how we can achieve it. But there are issues around older housing stock, and in particular, what I'm going to talk about today is how a very well-intentioned move on one side of the housing code has particularly adverse effects at another side of it. More particularly, and I want to thank the Lord Mayor earlier for her kind remarks about the Trust. The Trust is 130 years old this year. It provides 1,600 units of accommodation, in large part in old buildings from late Victorian, Edwardian period in Dublin. It owns a number of these units outright. So we're quite unique in that we own these units outright. They were built by the Trust, they've been managed by the Trust, and they haven't been funded by government at any time. That's one part of our stock. There's a second part that has been funded at some time. So they were built by the Trust and were managed by the Trust for a period of time, but at some point they received some state funding for refurbishments and so on. There's a third category of our stock, which I'm not going to deal with today, which is modern stuff that's paid for through conventional CAF and P&A means. So I just want to talk around what happens when a flat becomes vacant. And just bear with me on this. It's really not that, it's not complicated. But if you look there, we're looking at, this is a CAS unit, a capital assistance scheme unit that becomes vacant. The current rent on it is €89.30 a week. These are all live examples. But what I'm trying to get at is when that unit becomes vacant, the refurbishment spend, and these are absolutely, these are live examples of things that the Trust has faced over the past 12 months or so. The refurbishment spend, as you can see, ranges from just over €20,000 to just almost €9,000. But there's no way for us to claim that money back. So the maximum rent under the CAS that we can claim, that we can get for, say, a tenant, a household on social welfare income is in the right-hand column there. It's €101, it's €86, it's €85, it's €92. The net effect of that is that if you take the cost of refurbishing those 4 units, to pay back that refurbishment cost will take 67 years of the increase in rent for us to achieve that. Now, this is obviously very good for the tenant, and the tenant, this is not a tenant side problem. The tenant can't pay any more under the scheme than there's been. The subsidy from the state is capped at 55 to 60 euros a week. There's an effective rent cap on these units, and it's not viable for us. It's not viable to provide them at this level. The Trust does it and carries the cost of it, but I just want to flag, and this is an issue that other organisations will face in the coming years, as units come out of mortgage and come out of schemes, that it is extremely challenging to refurbish these to a decent standard and to remain viable. So I just want to move on to another category of flat that becomes vacant, and these are ones that we own outright. So there's no state claim on these. Theoretically, we could put these to the market, we could do anything we want. It's not our business to put them to the market, and we won't. But we have looked at an affordable rental scheme. So you look again and you think we want to offer an affordable rent to a household in one of these flats. The current rent is €89.30. It is as it was in the last slide. It's around 80 to 90 euros a week rent. The affordable rent per month that we'd like to offer is in the realm, depending on the size of the unit and particularly the income of the household we're offering it to, is in around 1,000 to 1,200 a month, which we think is where that intermediate rental level is for households who don't qualify for social housing, but who can't afford to rent in the market. We're captured by the RPZs on that. So the maximum rental increase that we could offer on that unit, if we were to put it out there, is, as you can see there, it moves from €89 to €92. We're capped by 4%, by the 4% increase. Now, the environmental aspect of this is that if we were to move up 7 steps in the BEO rating, we can escape the provisions of the RPZ and offer it into affordable rent. But we can't do that in most cases because any improvement that we have done to the flat over the time will impact on the possibility of raising the BEO up to 7 notches. These are listed buildings. They are, generally speaking, they're red brick construction. There's some interior render, it's very difficult to do it. So if you have done improvements inside over the duration of the life of the building, particularly in more recent years, it's much harder to get that 7-step increase in BER. Or we can leave the unit vacant for 1 or 2 years, in which case we can do what we like with it. So there's a perverse incentive in this to either to provide it for social housing or to try to do as we would like to do it for affordable housing. So I said the good deeds that are punished by the current regime are if you pursue a policy of modest annual rent increases, as I think most people would agree is the correct thing to do for good housing management, of 1 to 2%. The rent can still only be changed once a year, and it can only be raised by 1%. If you make minor improvements to energy efficiency, it's much harder to make that 7-step improvement up to improve the building to a standard where you'd like. With modern buildings, of course, it's easier because you have exterior options and exterior cladding, glazing, and so forth that are not open to heritage buildings such as ours. And if you turn around the units as quickly as possible, you bring them into the RPZ code. So what the Trust would like to do is, obviously we value enormously the heritage of the buildings, and we see ourselves very much as custodians of a heritage in that part of the city. We do want to offer below cost housing, both in the affordable and in the social sector, but it's making it these very unintended consequences of the housing code are making it very difficult. And I suppose what I want to highlight here is the potential that's in the sector, and particularly in organizations like ours and in other older AHBs and in all AHBs, and in terms of releasing value and generating investment in further housing stock. There's tremendous financing opportunities. Kevin talked earlier around what's available from the EIB. It would be difficult, but not impossible, if all AHBs and possibly some local authorities can come together to access EIB funding on a particular green initiative. But none of us are big enough on our own, I think, to do that. I think that would be something that would be enormously beneficial and well worth pursuing, to try to see really that rather than just try to get buildings up to code or slightly above code, that we're really aspiring to do deep retrofit and to get them to a level where we can offer enormous comfort to tenants, run more efficient buildings ourselves, and provide value to society in general, and to improve the environmental, to improve our carbon footprint. The other benefit of if we were able to do this is to pursue more mixed tenure and affordable rental models, particularly in cities where it's badly needed. There's an increasing amount of stock that's coming out of older schemes, and that could be made available for intermediate rental, which, as I say, to my mind, is for people who are struggling in the market, but who will not qualify for social housing under the present regime. And in general, I think there is great scope for innovation and for new models if we can, rather than try to stifle, if we can try to encourage and innovate to find new ways of doing things. So as I say, I focused on a very small aspect of how unintended consequences of well-intended measures can impact on organizations. But I think that there is tremendous opportunity in making, first of all, making organizations more financially sustainable, but also in making that step into environmental sustainability by encouraging greater levels of investment and by accessing funding. But that has to be done together, because none of us are big enough. No HB is big enough on its own to actually try and do that. So it needs some collective effort to try to go and do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Aidan. I think you have some good questions there, maybe for Kevin to address in the Q&A. Maybe you can shed some light on whether that's a possibility or not. So firstly, I'd like to just say a very big thank you to all four speakers. I think it's been a great mix of perspectives and has given us a great platform now to start coming in with maybe some of the audience coming in with some of their questions. Obviously, there's a lot of food for thought in all the topics that have been covered. I know we have a few questions coming in online there. So we might just kick off with that. I wonder, Aidan, would you like to start the Q&A by perhaps with a question for Kevin about can the housing bodies group together, perhaps? Might be a good way to kick us off.
Well, I mean, the EIB obviously deal at a much larger scale than any of us can cope with. I mean, the largest AHB in the country is 7,000 units. You put a few of those together, and the EIB deal in numbers of hundreds of millions. So, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, and Kevin may comment on it. There's a need for some kind of vehicle or some kind of structure for us to channel that money through.
Kevin, we might just ask you to come in there if you have some feedback on that.
Yes. Well, I think just to kind of focus back on one of the programs that we have, which is with the HFA. Part of the reason why we have the structure with HFA is to allow them to fund smaller scale projects. So they act as the intermediary. We're lending basically to HFA. The HFA then distributes into smaller projects. So that has been a very successful model for us. There's other means for distribution of capital, and sometimes that comes through similar type structure with the banking sector. What I would say is this an area that we could explore in terms of having AHBs come together? Certainly, it's something the bank would have a look at. We haven't had any approaches like that before, but it's certainly something we would look into.
It's super. Well, I think that's it's good to know that that's a possibility, which is super, because I think that would make obviously a big difference to the housing bodies. To be able to access that kind of money would be just, you know, a game changer, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose maybe just to add one other aspect, EIB often lends, it blends its financing with other EU funding. And sometimes that funding comes in terms of grants, and that's kind of outside my remit in terms of how those grants are allocated. But I could see some capacity for blending of funding sources alongside EIB.
Okay.
Of course, Paula, there is the issue of the money has to be remunerated in some way, so there probably is a need for some public sector engagement as well to help us remunerate the loans.
Okay, we might move on to the next question. If we have a question in from Niall Sheridan for Andree. Craig, I don't know if we can link Niall in so he can ask his question, or I can read it out. Okay, no answer from Craig there. Okay, well, maybe Andree, I might just ask you to, this is a question in from Niall Sheridan. He says, question for Andree on the fantastic schemes at Roche's Town and George's Place. I'd have to agree, they're very impressive, all right. Reflecting on the cost matrix for highly energy efficient schemes, has any analysis been carried out on the cost per metre squared unit of each of these schemes vis-a-vis a scheme constructed to a lower energy rating? So obviously the comparison there. Secondly, any feedback from tenants on their energy costs, experience of living in these great schemes? So two really nice questions in there from Niall. Andree, if you could answer those. Andree, sorry, you're on mute. You need to unmute yourself there, Andree.
Sorry, just realised. Yeah, I suppose everything we do is built to quite a good energy standard. So I suppose we haven't ourselves done an analysis. We haven't sort of done a lower level and then necessarily said, you know, what would it cost otherwise? Because what we actually find a lot is that it's the detailing and it's actually the management on site that actually makes the difference and actually gets you the better energy efficiency. It's not necessarily actually the cost of it. And also, depending on if you go to tender, for example, that design build project, we put in the higher standard. And we felt that because it was a tender, we actually got better value back. Whereas actually, if we had insisted on other things and maybe done employer-led design, sometimes people price that up. So there was competition for that project, you know, and as it happened, Sisk Living, who took it over, wanted to get into the market, I guess, of developing good quality housing. So they were competitive in that sense. So the units in Rochestown, I think, maybe cost in the order of 95,000 or something like that from memory now to do up. But so, and the George's Place ones, again, I think may have been in the order of 250,000 a unit or something. So it wasn't that they were a lot more expensive because they were energy efficient. We just think a lot of it is the fact that if contractors don't feel they're going to get away with shoddy detailing and on site and bad workmanship, that's where you lose out. So we actually find that it's not excessive. Like, we built a couple of little one bed apartments that were A1 rated and passive, and they were 160,000 construction costs. So they're it's not necessarily the cost of it. We find in DLR that's actually the cost of working in Dunleary Rathdown is the add-on cost, not necessarily the build cost itself. You know, it seems to be, we do find there seems to be a premium for actually the fact that we're in DLR at all. Maybe it's awkward to get to, you know, in terms of the roads or whatever, and difficult for the contractors to build there or whatever, you know. But so we don't necessarily think it's the energy efficiency aspect of it, you know, that actually is the difficulty. In relation to and I suppose the Rochestown job, we wanted to do it and we wanted it to be an exemplar. But again, with the extra training that we gave to the contractors actually benefited them. So they actually knew what they were having to do when they were putting in their tenders. So it wasn't like it came after the fact. And, you know, we find that quite useful. In relation to the tenants and their bills, etc., the one in Rochestown is an elderly scheme, and actually they pay a contribution generally, so they don't pay the direct bill themselves. George's Place, they have found the bills to be quite low, but there have been sort of lessons to be learned about actually the tenants being able to use the various bits of equipment, etc. That actually can be quite difficult sometimes. And in Rochestown as well, we can get a lot of information, but we haven't necessarily issued that information to the individual tenants because the different floors, for example, can perform a little bit better, or, you know, north side versus south side. And we don't really want to be in a situation where somebody says, well, you know, my apartment is X, you know, a little bit better or worse than the one upstairs or the one on the south side or whatever. So in that sense, it's not necessarily information that goes out, but it's more for us to learn from it, I guess, as to maybe is somebody using the rooms in a different way, are the windows being left open and the heating being left on when actually there's no need for the heating at all, etc. So it's more learning from that. But so I suppose, yeah, we don't realize really, I suppose, how it compares to a lower quality build, because it's really just, I suppose, we try and drive that through on site with detailing and with supervision, you know.
Thanks for that, Andree. I think that's really fascinating. That I would have thought myself that there was a premium, you know, or an increased cost because you're going to those higher standards. So it's fascinating to know that maybe there isn't, and it's really just you knowing what to specify and also how to judge the tenders. I mean, you gave some very practical tips there on, you know, specifying the air tightness testing and the costing of it. I mean, all those practical tips are obviously what is achieving those well, effectively.
I think it's also actually being clever about the design in the first place, because I suppose we all know that you can get NZ or A1 by adding on a whole load of, you know, additions, extra panels, whatever it is on the roof. But what we always do is we use the fabric first approach. So that means lots of insulation, really good levels of air tightness and good quality, indoor air quality, ventilation, etc. Because you obviously need that if you're doing a lot of extra insulation. So by choosing the items that relate to the fabric, you basically then blitz away sort of the technical side of it when you actually put it into the software. But actually it's the workmanship that actually matters as to whether you will get that air tightness on site or not. So, you know, we start with that in mind and we design that way, and then out of it comes the rating at the end. It's not necessarily worked the other way around, because you can get the same rating by a whole load of different ways, but it's not necessarily better for the tenant in the long run in terms of the levels of comfort they feel in the building or the quality of the air, etc. That's why we approach it from a fabric first point of view.
Okay, great, obviously very effective. So that's super. Thank you very much for that, Andree. We have another question in from Noel Cahill, and he has a question for Kevin on long-term lending. He says, one way of reducing the initial finance cost at least the level of repayments on loans for social affordable housing is to provide longer repayment terms. I understand the longest fixed term offered by the EIB for housing is 30 years. Could longer terms be offered? So one for you again, Kevin, please.
That's a question that I'm not sure I can answer at the moment. I think it is something that the bank considers. I don't know of any other loans that are beyond 30 years. In fact, when I look at the PPP program that we support, I think it's 28 years. But again, this is something I could probably explore within the bank and see if there's a changing view on that.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Kevin. We have a comment in from Alana Smith, and she's thanking the Irish Council for Social Housing. But she also says, in terms of joining together, she would recommend looking at the joint operating entity, New York City, where 11 affordable housing associations have collaborated to pool together their resources and shore up their balance sheets to take on more innovative projects. So maybe something for the next Irish Council for Social Housing meeting, board meeting or whatever. That sounds like a good project to have a look at. We also have another question from Colm Healy. He's saying there is a working group looking at cost rental, and we are targeting affordability at circa 1/3 of net income for those just above limits for social housing, e.g. 35,000 for single in Dublin, Cork and Galway. So another question in there. I'll just see if I can bring anyone in live. I don't think so.
Yeah, I think Paul, Craig has people ready for you there.
Oh, great. Okay, super. Okay, Craig, will I hand over to you? Want to bring someone in for a question there?
Keep going there, Paula. Yeah.
Who would you like to promote, Paula?
Well, I think everybody, Felipa Ferraz, she's had a few questions there. Maybe Felipa would like to jump in.
One moment.
Hello, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Felipa.
Oh, apologies, my video was off. It's on now. Hello, I work currently with the Culhane Co-Housing Alliance, and that was the reason why I asked some of the questions I did in the chat. I thank you very much for all the presenters. I don't know if it was clear, the question that I was asking to Kevin in respect to the funding, and most of all direct funding from the EIB. It seems currently that the HFA is supporting a lot of different types of developments, but they are all focused on social housing. Affordable housing seems to be something to be left for second stage, and it is obviously understood why that is, because there is quite pressing, it is a pressing situation now in Ireland in respect to social housing. But seeing that that's the case, could there be other approaches on supporting AHBs that do effective work on affordable housing? And if the European Investment Bank would consider one of two scenarios. So one, lowering the bracket of projects, around 20 million, which were projects that would, like in following the example that happened in Poland for affordable housing units as well, refurbishing and new housing, or if it is considered that the EIB could support groups of AHBs together, how many groups are we talking about, and what would be the limit that you, what would be the conditions for those partnerships? Because that would be important for any AHBs that would like to start, you know, conversations about partnerships. Like, what are the conditions that the EIB would like to see?
Okay. Well, thanks for the questions. And so there's really three questions that you're looking for to be answered. First is on, while the presentation does say 50 million as a project cost, I think like everywhere, you know, there is flexibility in terms of looking at lower amounts. I mean, that's not an absolute. And so just to say that, regarding the affordable housing, it's something that's clearly, even for EIB, it's something that we're looking at across the various member states. There is one project within the current HFA loan program that's incorporating affordable housing into that program itself, and excuse me, and it is clearly an area that we're focused on. And I might have mentioned the advisory program that we're working on with the Department of Housing. So we do see this as an area that we hope to advance. So just that is on that front. And lastly, the idea of grouping various AHBs together, I think that's yeah, I won't overstep my bounds, and you know, that's something the risk management guys would have a look at. And you know, like normal joint ventures, you know, you look at control and the balance sheets and the like. So I don't think there's a minimum, nor is there a maximum, but ultimately it's about the evaluating the governance of how that would work.
Thank
Does
you
that
very
help?
much.
So could we contact you directly? Would you have time for the meeting?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Kevin. You're being put on the spot very much there. Obviously, everybody's keen to try and see what they can get, but obviously it's great to know that there's an open door, and that's super. It's a good start in the right direction. Now we have Aisling Flynn next. Or no, Aisling's good. Her question has been answered. I had actually one question maybe the panel might be able to answer, just on the climate action plan. Obviously there's this big target of 500,000 retrofits, and I just wondered, what is the panel's view on even the capacity in the market here to deliver on that? Do any of you have any view on that?
I mean, it's hard to know. We don't really. It's kind of a time of turmoil in the market now. With COVID and so on, so we don't really know where it's going to go. But I guess a lot of construction activity is directed into new build housing, new build offices, and there probably is some constraint in retrofit. We've certainly found it harder to get tenders, but nothing terminal, if you like, nothing critical at the moment. But I think it's very much in a time of flux.
And actually, you know, just thinking of the Iveagh Trust, and obviously you have a lot of apartments there with families. I mean, how is that? How do families cope, especially in a time like this? It must be a bit challenging.
Well, I mean, it's taken a lot of work by our staff and by our team to make everything safe. But I mean, we've done it. We have the Iveagh Hostel with 195 men living in it, which we had an environmental health inspection of in terms of COVID, and we passed it full on. So it's taken a lot of work.
Yeah,
it's doable, and it is people's homes. It's not, you know, we have to look after and make sure that it's as safe as possible. And touch wood, we've had no incidents, and I think we have proper procedures and protocols in place to protect everyone. But it is true that in apartment living and in our kind of tight flat complexes, city centre flat complexes, it's more challenging because it's not even like new apartment blocks where you have a lot of cores and a lot of different entrances. There tends to be much more common entrances and points of contact between people than you have even in modern apartment blocks. But it's a question of just people's goodwill, working with residents, working with staff to create a safe working environment and a safe place to live.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Can come in?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Just in relation to that, I mean, I do think, I'm not quite sure, as I say, what the capacity out there is, but I would be quite concerned that we will ramp up and people will not be properly doing the retrofits, because trying, how difficult it actually is even to do quite a basic job right. There'd be a fear that people will just be rolling out and doing any type of work really, and that will actually be doing damage to the buildings, because it's quite a lot of learning even in a very simple retrofit to do things properly. So there's a lot of education required, I think, actually for the contractors, but also for whoever is going to be managing the work, and the homeowner can't be expected to actually know the technical detail of whether somebody puts a bit of external insulation versus internal insulation, and it's going to get a cold bridge, and then afterwards it's too late when they actually find that they have a problem. So I think certainly the upskilling and the learning is quite important, and we've found when we've done deep retrofits that it's actually very expensive to do. So it's, we need funding, and we're not getting enough really in the amount that currently the department gives the local authority for doing the energy upgrade,
Yes, thanks for that, Andree, and I'm sure there's a resounding nodding of agreement going across the participants here today. So I'm just going to, it's almost 3:25, so it's almost time to finish up. So again, a huge thank you to all the speakers. I think the Lord Mayor has had to go, but we'll thank her in her absence for participating, and for all the rest of the panelists. It was a great discussion, and I hope that everybody enjoyed it, and coming away with some good tips and some food for thought for the future. So it's been my real pleasure to chair this session, and I'm now going to hand over to Donal, who is the CEO of the Irish Council for Social Housing, and Donal is just going to wrap up and close out the conference. So thank you very much from me, and I'll pass you over to Donal.
Hi, thanks, Paula, and thanks for a great session, chaired very well by yourself. Look, my name is Donal McManus, and my job is to close this conference and bring the curtain down after 3 days. I have to say, this is our 7th biennial Finance and Development Conference. It started in 2008 in the aftermath of an economic crisis, where a small number of financial experts in the sector decided to come together and see what solutions could they have for the long-term financing of social housing in the aftermath of the crisis. So it's grown from that small gathering of interested people into this event, and this event over the last 3 days, up to almost 500 people registered at various sessions. So thanks to all those people who took the time and interest to come along for that. I think there are a huge amount of range of finance and development issues discussed, debated, a lot of solutions given, and also in the social housing sector, there's a huge amount of passion in terms of what people feel could be done better and more efficiently and quicker. So I'd like to thank firstly all the speakers from all the parts of the sector, from the HP sector, our members, local authorities, public bodies, government departments, and indeed also the private sector as well. It just shows you the change in the last 12 years for this type of conference. The range of stakeholders now we need to finance and develop social housing and affordable housing are the private sector actors as well. So thanks to them for all the presentations. And as I said, Paula, in relation to chairing, the chairing has been exemplary for this event. As these virtual events, being able to chair them well helps the whole flow of the events. So look, in terms of the other acknowledgement and support I want to give to is Craig and Shane from AFEC for trying to support us with this event, and also to our staff. Our staff put a huge amount of effort in trying to get this event going. We extracted speakers from around the world, from 3 continents, from Australia, Europe, US, and UK. So it's testament to our staff being able to bring them all together. And we did feel that even this time COVID, all discussion around that was important to keep the ship afloat. Not to have the conference defined by COVID, but certainly looking at the key financial development issues we have to examine now going forward in the next number of years. So look, this is, we've all take something from an event like this here, whether it's individually, various solutions, or a higher level in terms of new policies. But one thing struck me with this event was it's almost, we always try to create awareness in the social housing sector. We're here for the long term. Both EHBs and local authorities. EHBs, as was mentioned earlier, has over 130-year history of providing and managing housing in Ireland. Local authorities, you know, had their centenary, the 100 years of local authorities last year. So we're not going anywhere quickly, and it's very useful to hear in various sessions throughout the last couple of days financial investors thinking the same thing, thinking long term. So some of our ideas are aligning to, we're in for the long term, and investors looking at stable investment, you know, social housing is for the long term and a stable return. So maybe some of our ideas are trying to align. I think the minister set the pace early on, you know, at the conference, saying, look, this is what we all have to do in the next number of years. It's a big challenge, and we all have to work together. And certainly the partnerships in the different players in the sector has really improved over the last 3 or 4 years, and certainly with COVID, there's been a lot of work, common work, to try and resolve any of those issues that we had working together. So look, we're for the long term. Hopefully we'll be here in another 2 years for our next Finance and Development Conference. Hopefully it might be a different forum, not on Zoom this time, but initially we try to have a hybrid of studio and broadcast, but look, this is the way we had it. So I hope people did gain something out of the event. As I say, we have to keep our focus on delivering homes for people in housing need. This conference particularly focused on finance development. We can't resolve every issue. So there was a lot out of it. We can go back to our own individual organisations and try and implement things more efficiently. So thanks to you. Even today's speakers, Kevin, even the short time you've come aboard for this, so thanks very much. I know you're out in West Virginia at the moment, so but thanks to you and even Caitlin this morning and all the other speakers that's plugged into this event. I hope it was of value. The goal of this here is to try and improve how we work and how to deliver and bring you stakeholders to the table as well. So thanks very much for your attendance. I think it's time now to put the kettle on, press the leave button, and hopefully we'll gather again in 2 years' time. So thanks very much for all your support. And as I said, particularly AIB, Paul Kelly and Stuart Muldowney, a lot of work in as well in supporting this event. So thanks to them, and hopefully we'll be working together in the near future. Thanks very much. And thanks, it's time to sign off to everyone. All the best. Bye.